What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 162. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I have a fantastic interview that I know everybody is going to love. I'm talking with Scott Spaulding. He's an Iraq and Afghan War vet and host of the I'm Antiwar podcast. Of course, Scott has been on the show before to talk about his individual experiences in Afghanistan. But what we're talking about on today's show is the first in the series of the villains of the Afghan War. And we really focus on the culture in this show. So the NFL, Hollywood, and TV shows that help to indoctrinate the American people and get them to be pro-war. So this is a really great episode. I know everybody's going to want to share the show. You could do that at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show and the daily news roundup that I write. We post a video version of the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. Wherever you're listening, subscribe, give the show a thumbs up. You could find the show on any of our social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. We take donations. It really does help out the show if you guys could do that. Patreon, subscribe, start set up recurring donations. We do have crypto information in the show notes page. Another way that you can help the show and get yourself some great CBD products is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is the URL. The promo code is PEACE, PEACE. That gets you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. They have a fantastic lineup of products at Paloma Verde. Topicals are what I really like and use most of the time. I use their sports cream almost every day. It works fast, it smells good, it lasts a long time, and it doesn't take very much of the product to get a long-lasting pain relief. And so it's quite a bit cheaper than most of the over-the-counter products you get at the traditional pharmacies. But check out their wide selection of products, including the soft gels, the gummies, the topicals, and even if you think CBD can help your dog, they have products for your dog in there. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, and let's get into the interview with Scott Spaulding. Hey Scott, how's it going? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest.
Great, Kyle. Great. Doing pretty good. Coming off a good weekend with End the Wars, and weekend before that, I saw Pat from Liberty Weekly and at the Ron Paul event. So I'm kind of on a Liberty and anti-war high, I guess.
Yeah, and I actually spoke this past weekend at the Denver and the Damn Wars event. I got that video posted up on the YouTube channel if people want to check that out. But Scott, today I'm really excited because I'm doing this series, and I'm kind of a little bit jokingly calling it Heroes and Villains because I know a lot of the people I would refer to as heroes on the list are uncomfortable with that title. But the villains are definitely villains, and we're gonna start today with the villains and really the like kind of cultural aspect of it, because this was a lot of it, as much as it was George Bush and Barack Obama and our political leaders. As somebody who spent their childhood through a good amount of this thing, it was far more the TV shows and the movies that I think had an impact on a lot of us. So I think this is going to be really great. But let's start off with the media, and particularly some of the stuff going on in the media as they kind of cover in retrospect this war, and some of the voices that they're having on are quite incredible. So I'll just let you kick it off from there, Scott.
Yeah, no, so this is, I've been, since things kind of came to a close, I was thinking that, there's all this generic talk about accountability, but no one naming names. And I was sitting there like, somebody has to go through and really think about who and how do we hold people accountable, instead of just saying generally that the people who are responsible for this catastrophe should be, have their feet held to the fire. And we need to think about who it is and how we can act. And I think the area where we have the most leverage right now, at least, is to think over our own actions, is to think about what media, what are we consuming that contributes to this. So, the first thing that came, obviously all the presidents and all that, we know those names, but the media, and it was really telling when we were watching if you were watching it unfold, the end of the war in Afghanistan unfold, the people who are telling us what were happening are the same people that implemented these policies, not just, and actually even worse, it's not the people that are telling us what's happening are not just the people who were in the media 20 years ago telling us we needed to go to war. It's actually the people, a lot of times, it's people that were in the Bush administration telling us we needed to go to war, then, now, in the media telling us we can never leave. So I kind of start out with just a rundown, and everyone knows that the media is not the main, these cable networks and whatnot are not to be trusted, but just how bad it is, on Fox News this past week, Mark Thiessen was a Bush speechwriter, so he was the one telling us to go to these wars, and he had on Mike Pompeo, Karl Rove, and I can't remember the name of Perino and McInerney. They're all on the payroll. These are people that all worked for Bush or worked in the neocon establishment pushing for the war that are now posing as media members telling us why we can never leave and never stop fighting these wars. And it's obviously not, it's not, the really interesting part is Fox is hardly even the worst offender, because you might think, they would be, but MSNBC has been horrific. They just have they have Brian Williams, Alicia Mendez, Adnan Girhardis, and Nicole Wallace. They had like a guest like Nicole Wallace on. They interviewed, so these hosts of MSNBC, interviewed Leon Panetta and let him give his opinion. God forbid anybody like Scott Horton or Matthew Ho or any people that really can tell you what happened and were there predicting these outcomes. It is interesting. God forbid any of those people get it on the cable and get to say what really happened. You have MSNBC platforming Leon Panetta and Nicole Wallace blaming, causing everything. And these were people that were in the administration. And then CNN, of course, is also terrible. Brianna Keller had on General Petraeus. Poppy Harlow had on John Bolton. And Asha Rangappa. I obviously don't watch CNN very much, but she was an FBI agent that joined the FBI in like 2001. She's a law professor and national security law commentator at the same time, and serves as the national security and legal analyst for CNN. So you have these people that were kind of embedded in it. They're creating the architecture for she's creating the architecture for the war on terror in the FBI, and then comes on CNN and tells us why they were right, justifying her own previous actions essentially. And then it just on and on. George Stephanopoulos, who it's amazing that he went from being a Clinton speechwriter, same thing, to now I believe he was a speechwriter, wasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah, to now having a main, not even cable news, but national ABC News. And of course he's going to have on Liz Cheney to tell us about the war. Not anyone, here's George Stephanopoulos, the Democrat speechwriter. Still, you have even the left-wing media, the CNN or what, CNN, everyone's, you can't trust them, they're left-wing media, but they're having on John Bolton rather than anyone actually of the left, and ABC having on Liz Cheney,
Right.
So it's just across the board that really this moment at the end of the war, and the one war, there's obviously several still ongoing, but this moment, they really show their true colors, that it's not there might be a left and a right, but on the foreign policy, they are united completely in lockstep on international interventionism forever.
Right.
Yeah,
and not that every MSNBC panel has to have like Danny Sherjan on it or something, but you would think that a Afghan war vet who taught at West Point, who's written several books on the issue, who is one of the most prolific foreign policy writers who's been published in all kinds of publications. He does interviews with Oliver Stone. So, this is like, at least he should be somewhere. And yet, I'm pretty sure all we've really gotten is Matt Ho on the knockoff MSNBC Peacock channel. And not to, dismiss what Ho is doing, but just that, this is not like he was put in front of like, the mainstream cable audience. And then the same thing with Scott Horton, who's only on Fox Business Channel. He's been on there twice, but it's not like they're having him on weekly, or that he's on the actual Fox News channel, the big one. He's on like Kennedy's show. And there just really hasn't been many informed voices at all on the dissenting side. I mean, hell, they really don't roll out any dissenters, though. It's not like they even have Michael Moore up there, like, spouting off some nonsense and making us look bad. But at least, he's on like kind of the right side of it, even if he can't articulate and really doesn't know what he's talking about. Also, one of the things in the media that has really driven me nuts is there's a real lack in the media of looking back at the media and being like, oh boy, we only covered this thing for 5 minutes.
Isn't that what Brian Stelter's supposed to be doing?
Right? Oh man, I can't even. If I pay attention to that guy, I spend my whole day just raging and like tweeting, like typing out tweets and then being like, no, that one's gonna get me banned.
Funny story.
Go ahead.
But when he went to my same undergrad, and he was the first media person to ever interview me for the Towson Tower Light newspaper. Before, in between my first and second deployment, he did a little write up. So it's just funny whenever I hear his name. Yeah. God, if I had just managed to, what did I do? How did I? What role did I play in causing this mess? But.
Right. And I mean, that would just, if the media was honest, that's what they would be doing. Richard Engel is somebody who's been covering this thing the whole time and pretends like, he's some kind of expert on it, when really he's just, done what the Western media and military has allowed him to do for a few minutes every couple of years, and pretends that, he's now somehow able to put this into a historical perspective, or whatever the hell he's doing. But anything else on the media and how they, especially the recent coverage, it's been atrocious. But
yeah, it has been terrible. I mean, I think there are some silver linings. It just, for what it's worth, I have seen. I can't even call out I do know that Spencer Ackerman made it onto a podcast my fiance listens to. There have been some glimmers, and let's be honest, having Scott Horton even make it onto Fox Business, and Matthew Ho being allowed onto Peacock, he was blacklisted basically effectively for a while, it doesn't feel like much. It might not seem like much, but it's progress, that there's kind of chinks in the armor a little bit opening up. And like, I know that my local talk radio pundit is reading Anand Gopal's book, which is great. I think she kind of picked it up by accident, like she just picked the bestseller,
and he writes in the New York Times, and that's one of that is another thing you gotta give I guess the New York Times in particular credit for. They've written actually two very important stories in the past couple of weeks. Yep. One being on Anand Gopal's The Other Woman, and then the other one is the story that me and Will covered on Monday's show about the airstrike in Kabul, and really tracking down and doing the good hard reporting and finding out that no, this guy wasn't ISIS. Him and his family were just murdered by the U.S.
Yeah, just to throw in that as much as there are some terrible ones and they've really shown their colors, that can be a positive thing, that people, and that somehow there's openings coming up. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right, so should we move on and talk about Hollywood here? And, while this doesn't sound like maybe the biggest villain of the war, as being somebody who was a kid for the first half of it, I was for the first 8 years, I was, under the age of 18, so a lot of people consider me a kid. I would say that this, plus the video games, maybe had one of the biggest impacts on me, far more than, maybe the George Bush mushroom cloud thing really did scare the hell out of me. But you know, a lot of it was like all the war movies and how cool all those guys looked, and the, you know, fancy planes that they had, and the Transformers movies. You know, those guys on the deck of the aircraft carrier saluting next to the, you know, big giant robots. That looked cool. Like I was really, you know, captivated by that. So I'm interested to hear what you have here.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the things that's really, there have been some good movies out, but they're kind of the exception. I mean, there's good stuff out there in the last 20 years. But really, when you look at the majority and what most people consume, I mean, I generally don't watch that many schlocky. Michael Bay is not someone I'm a fan of, you know, like, but God knows it's popular. You know what I mean? Wildly popular, like Transformers movies and Captain America, and all that. And you know, the best person to listen to on this is probably Tom Secker. But you can't underestimate the amount of time and effort the military puts into controlling what gets out there and dangling free access and being able to have a military advisor listed on the credits and getting free military equipment. So in order to make your movie, your Transformers movie, or Captain, was the first really big Marvel one, Iron Man. The military puts a lot of time, money, and effort into getting their hooks in. There was a great episode of something I was listening to recently about, basically a TV show they managed to kill. It was called The Code. It was about the UCMJ and the Marine Corps. Basically, the first season was written to be very critical, and they managed to rile people. Like they hid the fact that the Marine Corps was approached approached the writers of the story repetitively, knowing that the story was not going to make them look good. And then they kind of mobilized people to be critical of it. And then the network basically buckled and let them have some editorial control for the second season. And apparently everyone stopped watching, and it tanked after the midway through the second season. They put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that their image is exactly what they want portrayed in every movie where they're depicted. And especially at the beginning of the 20 years ago, I mean, they sat down with Karl Rove, the head of the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, which, I mean, the only way I was familiar with them is that they were the little acronym that came before the rating, whether it was rated R or whatnot. Yeah. But they kind of organized and created that, and it was kind of a regulatory, it was sort of, even that was a regulatory avoidance or capture kind of thing, where they were under criticism. The movies were under criticism for being, not regulated well enough, and Congress starts leaning on them and say, okay, well, we'll write our own regulations. We'll regulate ourselves so that Congress doesn't regulate for us. And the MPAA is basically a lobbying organization, but they got Karl Rove basically got in a room, got himself on November 8th, 2001. So we're talking right at the beginning of the war, in a room with all the executives of CBS, Viacom, Showtime, DreamWorks, Paramount, HBO, MGM, and they basically sat down and said that they expect to be represented in a positive light, and that the war is a good, get on board. You know what I mean? We're going along. And what's really interesting is each of the heads, the current head of the MPAA is named Charles Rivkin, former appointed ambassador to France and Monaco, huge Democrat fundraiser, is basically how he got to be an ambassador. But his background was basically in Democrat, fundraising in California, and then being an ambassador and working very closely as an ambassador to coordinate huge D-Day celebrations and get naval exercises and operations. So he's the current head of the MPAA. The one before that was a Democratic chairman, was a former senator in the Democratic National Committee, and the one before that was in addition to being a member of the House of Representatives, was on the Select Committee for Intelligence, served in the External Advisory Board to the CIA and under the Obama administration. And the one before that, for about 60 years, named Jack Valenti, he's the one that sort of initiated this. We're going to work together to propagandize. He was the head of the MPAA all the way back to before to the Kennedy administration, when he was the media liaison for Johnson and was there on the scene when Kennedy took a fateful ride around Dallas. So it's just interesting that every single person that's been at the head of the MPAA, in addition to being a lobbyist, has kind of, let's say, questionable connections, or at least, intelligence connections, which one might develop over time. But it's just interesting that here we have, we have a military that's very interested in being portrayed the way they want to be, and every person that's the head of the Motion Picture Association, the major lobbying organization that decides how you'll be regulated, is connected very closely.
Yeah. There's I don't know if there's anything here or anything like that, but it is interesting that movies that are fairly violent, like Transformers or the Marvel movies, get ratings that are usually PG, so they could be shown in schools and stuff like that. I worked in a school where Transformers and Marvel movies were like kind of go-to because they're action movies, but you're not gonna there's no way you're gonna get in trouble for showing those, right? Like, but anything that like is maybe a little too sexual, a little too much language, absolutely taken off the table right away. And I'm just wondering if maybe there's some Pentagon influence within like the MPAA, where they just kind of shifting the standard of what's going to be unacceptable, and they seem to have a lot of control over that by how the ratings go.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. They that's always the discussion that you'll hear from people, or at least the discussion you'll hear all the time, is why can I watch someone be gutted in a movie, as gruesomely as possible, and everyone's fine. No one hardly even bats an eye about that. But you can't see a nipple. You know what I mean?
Right. Or a Sandlot because of the word shit. Know what I mean? It's just stuff like that.
And that goes even further, because that is interesting. Just in general in the culture, it's like that. But how much is that because of the influence of this organization? And then, but then you go a little further to the actual. And again, Tom Secker's amazing on this. But you go a little further, he'll do the what they call the Freedom of Information Act requests to find out exactly what notes were passing back and forth between movies and between movies and the military. And what's interesting is that's what they care the most about. Strangely enough, they don't care about the level of violence. They don't care about any of those things. But they won't support the making of Independence Day, not because it's full of crazy aliens or any of that, but because they didn't like that Will Smith was a Marine officer who was dating a stripper. They would not support, just because the movie, they could have gotten all the support in the world for that movie. Independence Day was not supported by the military, but it was only because the military objected, and for some reason the writers stuck to their ground instead of having his girlfriend at the very beginning, who plays no role in the story whatsoever, but just the fact he wakes up next to her and she's got like stripper heels next to the bed or something like that, and they kind of say that she's a stripper.
There's like one scene where she's in the club. It was one of my favorite.
Really? I don't remember it that well.
Yeah, she's like leaving at the beginning, and honestly, as a kid growing up, I didn't even it didn't register, because I think that movie came out in like 96, 97.
Yeah.
And I was just too young. I never got it. I thought she was a dancer, like a ballet thing. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just so funny because that's the reason the DoD won't support the movie, and that goes across the board all the time. They'll worry about language. They'll worry about their image, and do they look like poster boys for the Aryan race? You know what I mean? They'll worry about that. Not actually, but they're more focused on that. What is the image of a Marine in the movie? When you close your eyes and picture Marine, do you see someone who? The truth is, the truth could. I mean, God knows, biting the bullet or some other guys. But truth is, the depiction of Will Smith dating a stripper is probably closer to reality than him dating a PhD like in some other war movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Or she
that's
was
just
like a good stay-at-home mom who just raised the little boy. That's probably what they wanted to portray,
yeah.
is her being like a stay-at-home mom. One thing that I guess I think I picked this up from Tom Secker was especially if we look at the past 20 years of movies made in or about Afghanistan. A couple come to mind: The Lone Survivor, Zero Dark 30, and War Machine with Brad Pitt, which was the one produced on Netflix. And I think they didn't have any influence from the Pentagon in that movie, and that movie doesn't portray the military in a good light. It kind of looks like a failed mission. I mean, it's not explicit, I guess. It doesn't portray the Iraq Afghan War well, but I guess it's not like the biggest indictment I could think of. But it's not great. But compared to Zero Dark 30 and the other movie, which are straight up propaganda, it's interesting how that works out, huh?
Yeah, it really is. That it plays a role. The influence they peddle, and it seems as I was poking around, and I'm not the type of person that pays attention to who the director or producer is, but I did, as I was digging around for this, kind of notice that like it definitely seemed like Paramount was actually the head of Paramount was the one that organized that meeting with Karl Rove, and I noticed that a lot of the major more propaganda movies are produced by Paramount. It just as not just a general survey. As I was looking through, it just kind of kept being I was paying attention to that. And also, I don't typically pay attention to this, but I noticed that the major movies, like you mentioned, even though she's only done 2, Catherine Bigelow seems to, like, looking at her record, kind of looking back, like she definitely only portrays the military in a favorable light, and only when she produces something, she's on board. She'll play the notes that the DoD wants her to play about a story, in everything she does. Which is, so keep your eyes open. If it's a Catherine Bigelow movie, maybe don't throw your money that way. You know what I mean? And Peter Berg is even worse. He seems to be their go-to guy. You name it, even if it's schlocky crap. And another thing that was hard to suss out is I did a little bit of weeding through. Like, Morgan Freeman's been in freaking everything. He just doesn't care. So, like, I saw that he was in a lot of terrible, like, Olympus Has Fallen, London Has Fallen, and Gerard Butler too. Like, but apparently they're just whores. Like, they'll be in anything, it seems like. So I kind of weeded those out as saying they're just terrible. But Peter Berg, this director, Lone Survivor, Patriots Day, Lions for Lamb, The Kingdom, Alias, the TV show, and Battleship, which was a ridiculous propaganda movie that the Navy paid for. I never watched. I saw like one video, like one thing about it. Are you serious? This is a thing that they paid money to do. He'll just make anything the military wants him to make, and he's very much on board. I never heard of that director by name before. I don't think he's won any major awards. Maybe he has, but yeah, Peter Berg seems like one to avoid. Right. And then in general, I kind of just noted that. Just the role in general that these fear porn movies played. Some of All Fears, 24, I couldn't even think of all of them, but Some of All Fears and Designated Survivor, like daily drip on television for those that are watching the primetime TV, getting their sort of regular daily drip of you need to be terrified of the terrorists, and you need these secretive criminal agencies to protect you at all times, are kind of up there. I never really consumed those, but my father, God, he watches every cop procedural there is in history, and those sorts of things just kind of cloud the mind and give people let's be honest, how many people really are paying attention to the media, and when the last terrorist attack or who was, are they really paying attention or only paying attention when they're told to? But everyone, or a lot of people in America, could tell you what happened on the last episode of 24. You know what I mean? Yeah. Obviously that's over with now, but a few years back, you know what I mean? Half of America, probably 2005 or 6 or 7, could tell you what Jack Bauer did last week.
Oh, yeah. I was a high school boy during that time, and so that was a big one because he was like a cool looking dude and kicked ass and kept people safe. And I believe that was still going on when like the Karyaku revealed the torture program and all that information was coming out. And I feel like that was big for me at the time, kind of cloaking how terrible the torture program was, because like you see it on TV with this guy, and he tortures and saves people's lives.
Yeah,
so
and they show it working.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Right.
They and that's not by accident.
Mm-hmm.
See, all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure, and I just couldn't even like go through and figure out all the shows. But if you're watching fear porn, or somebody you is, try to find them something better.
And this was actually a conscious choice I made like 7 or 8 years ago. I used to watch like just a couple shows like that. I liked NCIS and Criminal Minds, and in the same season they had like some terrorists hijacked a drone and hit some government building in NCIS, and then they ran a smear campaign against Wallace Albrecht and Silk Road on a season of Criminal Minds. So like I deliberately tuned out after that, and I don't watch any more of that crap. But one thing I've noticed is, especially growing up, it seemed like it was like a lot of it was geared towards like young men, all the war movies and stuff. But now I was scrolling through Netflix, and I got a fiance, so sometimes you gotta watch those rom-coms and stuff like that. They have like, I don't know what it was, like postcards from an aircraft carrier, or like Hallmark movies like about like soldiers, and I think one of them was even like a female soldier like trying to find love. And it's going in a little bit of a different direction now, but it's very interesting to see that they've kind of started to maybe tailor their propaganda towards the young women too.
Yeah. Well, and there's a great bit about like what was it? What's the singing movie that something? The movie where they do like a cappella singing.
Is it newer? Is it the one in LA? Is
Pitch Perfect.
Okay,
Pitch Perfect 3 was like apparently a DoD production. You know what I mean? So you're right on with that. And then they did, and then there's another, exactly like you were saying, like Operation Christmas Drop or something like that. All these Hallmark, they're getting into Hallmark movies now, and just making sure that they're planted. And this goes back a long way. This isn't just the war on terror. You can go back to Jurassic Park, friggin', well, maybe this was after 2000. I don't know, when the Jurassic Park 3, the Marine Corps paid to make sure that it was the Marine Corps that rescued them at the end. Just bolt us in. We had nothing to do with the story, but at the end, the Marines just show up and pull everyone off the island. You know what I mean? And they paid a lot of money to get the privilege of just showing of just inserting themselves into this story about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
To make sure
they have a nice little one-liner before that where the kid looks out and sees all this stuff, and he's like, "Oh, my mom called like the Army and the Marines," or something like it's something like that. And like then there's like this nice zoomed out view of like the ships moving in formation, and like they're like preparing to like invade Normandy or something like that. I distinctly remember that scene though.
Yeah, it's crazy what they do, but they just planting themselves in there everywhere. Just drip, drip, drip. They're trying to fill your mind with like that the military is the only, like, it's crazy how far they'll go, and that kind of feeds like, and then just kind of roll right into the aspect of sports. They just people talk about the relationship between sports and militarism, and that it's ages ago, people talked about like the football being an allegory for war. You know what I mean? You watch that stupid, what was a favorite movie of mine? The one with Rodney Dangerfield, Back to School, where like, he became Iron Man. Who's the actor who became Iron Man?
Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr.'s in there, and he's saying, football is just a crypto-fascist analogy for war, man. And Back to School, he's kind of like this kind of hippie or like punk kid or whatever. I still remember that. But like, so that's all well and good. That there's always this element of like, what are these sports for? But even then,
Just on that real quick, there's
Yeah,
that specific scene in Remember the Titans where Denzel Washington has them all march out to Gettysburg and talks about how they're like brothers in war and stuff like that. And I think there's kind of there was a lot of that like around like the 9/11 time too, like, we're all brothers, it doesn't matter the color of American skin, we're all brothers in the war against the Muslims kind of thing.
yeah. And so I say, yeah, there's always been this connection with like in the minds of people between sports and that teamwork aspect and all that. But after 9/11, they really just ramped it up like crazy. The connection between the NFL and Major League Baseball and NASCAR, just, it was one thing if they played a recruiting commercial between games, but God, I can't remember what football game I was watching, but every commercial break was basically wall-to-wall recruiting ads. You know what I mean? And that's one thing. That's obviously where their bread is buttered. I mean, the NCAA football is going to get a lot of people. They're paid with ads. That's where they make a lot of their money. And if the DoD is throwing that money around for ad buys, then what do you do about that exactly? But it goes beyond that because they're also paying for the entire, propaganda show, pregame show, and the we all know about the flyovers and stuff like that. But then, so one of the villains kind of to me is like, especially the NFL, Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, and like, you could. I'm not saying don't watch your sports ball, don't watch your movies, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, I like football, but be conscious of the fact that like and we all know this. We all know that there's the entire hour of flag waving and the huge show before the game, but the NFL they were paid to do that. They weren't doing it out of the kindness of their hearts or to make a buck. But now, strangely, I think they kind of are, and they also went along with you mentioned last week or in your last episode or the one before that about the Tillman story, and they're still slapping a Pat Tillman statue out front of the stadium, which is warranted in a sense. He was, but not for the reasons they're valorizing him.
Right.
Like they're valorizing him not as a memorial to a life wasted in the war, in the worst possible way, with the lies and cover up. And I imagine almost everyone listening to this is familiar, but the fact that they essentially knew from the minute he was killed that it was friendly fire, and General McChrystal, the head of his command, General Abzaid, the head of CENTCOM, all the way up, knew and covered up that he had been murdered in friendly fire, and then went up to the top we're going to turn this person who was questioning the war. His diary mysteriously disappeared. People knew that he had been questioning the wars. I believe he had been to Iraq. There's a great documentary called The Tillman Story, I think. He had been to Iraq. He was now in Afghanistan. He was questioning what we were doing there. And he ends up dead. And instead of respecting his wishes not to be turned into this icon, they
propaganda figure. I mean, they really
He did not. He explicitly wanted to avoid that when he joined. You know what I mean? When he joined up, the book too, I did read it, Where Men Win Glory, by John Krakauer. Kind of goes into how when he joined, he didn't want to be turned into he knew that he would be. That people would look at an NFL player who joins the Army at that time in a certain light, but he explicitly didn't want to be used as a recruiting propaganda tool even then. And they completely disrespected his wishes immediately, and did everything they could to twist from what the patriotic duty is to join the military. And when he was killed, they did everything they could to lie and cover up the way he was killed. And for years, it made his family go through the process of trying to get that information out of them when they shouldn't have had to beg to find out what happened, or fight to find out what happened. And Roger Goodell was, at least in part, a group of veterans at one point in around 2007 reached out asking the NFL to help get the true story out on their behalf. To help, I think they were trying to get the NFL, Goodell to like sue for freedom of information about it, and obviously he had no interest in doing that and being forthcoming, you know. Um, and then just kind of in general, and this is across the board, but you know, this also predates the war on terror, but like, you know, it's interesting that like I don't know if you know this, but don't join the Marine Corps because of this, people. I'm telling you right now. But you do get a free Padres game. You get to if you're on the West Coast and you join the Marine Corps and go to boot camp, you go to a Padres game for free in the baseball season, one Friday or whatever. But just that's a part that's always been a part. The respect the troops, the stand up for the troops, or troops stand to be recognized. Things just really went to like they dialed up to 11 during the war on terror, and I frankly hate it. You know, because you'll even get pressure from your friends or people you're there with to stand up, and it's like, this isn't what I want to be doing right now. You know, I've never wanted that recognition. It's uncomfortable, even when I was still gung ho. But then you have the aspect of like the sort of memorabilia where all the sports teams started, and this kind of is going to tie to the retail aspect, started having the camo uniforms and the Military Appreciation Day, and it spun out into, my friend works for Nike, and like arranging the basketball game on the deck of an aircraft carrier just to kind of, well, it's going to be cooler if we have this basketball game outside, a college basketball game outside with helicopters flying around, you know, instead of in a stadium. All of those things just kind of keep feeding this, normalizing what's insane. Anywhere else in the world, the flag waving militarism, almost anywhere else in the world outside of North Korea, having, you know, an honor guard march on and having the troops stand up and be recognized would be looked at as absurd. But it's so slowly become the norm that we just have lost our minds, you know. And I don't know how to get back from that, except for just not going to those things, not attending, you know. But something, I don't know how you break that, but the fact that every team has to have a camo uniform showing once a year and stuff like that is, I think it might be dying down a little bit. I think it might have peaked a little while ago. But even, you know, I would try to buy freaking basketball shorts just to wear around the house, and I couldn't find a pair that didn't have friggin' camouflage on them or something.
Yeah.
You know, why?
I feel like it depends where you are, because, you know, when I was living on the East Coast in Boston, like, I really didn't see a whole lot of it. But like when I go home to St. Louis, I see quite a bit, like the camo on everyone and all the camo jerseys and camo hats and everything like that. I mean, some of it's hunting, but most of it is military. You mentioned kind of briefly there NASCAR, and I just want to talk about this for a minute, because I am a big NASCAR fan. I don't watch many sports, but I do watch NASCAR. But now I do have to wait until the race starts to turn it on, because pre-race is just love for military. And I guess it would be one thing if it was just like, you know, we have our troops in this special section, yay them, but it goes a lot deeper than that, and they, you know, really get into like the propaganda narratives. The troops are keeping us safe, we need to pray for our troops, we need to support our troops. And, you know, this really feeds into the whole, if you're, you know, not for the wars, you're against the troops, and all those kind of nefarious narratives. They also have the flyovers before almost every single race, and I mean, that's just wasteful. It just makes me mad for that reason. And then there's not always, but typically there are, like, you know, troops that have like some kind of special access, and like, you know, at some point one of the announcers will take a moment of the race to recognize that, like, oh, you know, there's this army squad from this local base and this pit crew, and they're hanging out there tonight and having a great time, and aren't they just the bravest men and women that we have in our country? You know, just everything repeated in every race. And you know, it does dropped the enjoyment a little bit for me. But it has actually, NASCAR's gotten a little bit better. It was Senator Claire McCaskill, who's actually from Missouri, led an effort to strip some of the funding for like primary sponsorship for NASCAR, because before they were very targeted and had for years the most popular driver in the sport. I think for a while was Casey Kane, then Dale Earnhardt Jr. as having primary sponsorships either from the National Guard or a different branch in the military. And I mean, they do a good job with those cars. Those are nice logos. They look cool. I mean, they're slick looking cars. Like, you gotta admit it. They do a good job with their propaganda sometimes, and they definitely do with NASCAR.
Yeah, they it's amazing the figure, and you were saying how slick those things look, and I don't know that this goes. I'm sure I'd be very curious what the graphic design and advertising budget is for each of these departments. I'm sure it can be found out, but I know I was looking to see if there was any crossover between like directors who direct like Marine Corps recruiting commercials, because famously those are pretty successful. The Marine Corps, like, they would have, when they get a new recruiting commercial every year or two, they'll usually do like an unveiling on base where the general will bring everyone in. I remember the one that came out the last few years I was in the Marine Corps. We had to basically go to the theater on base and the general talk about how proud he was of this new recruiting commercial and sit there and watch like this 2-minute ad. You know what I mean? Or a minute and a half ad or whatever it was. So I was looking up the agencies, and I know advertising agencies are a little bit like secretive, so they don't exactly tell you everyone, but I did, like, it was something like when they renewed they've been working with the same ad agency for 72 years, the Marine Corps has, and it was like a $530 million contract, their last renewal. It's like a good chunk of money.
Yep.
And so I tried to find out who directs those ads, but I couldn't find the names of the direct. Actually, the latest Marine Corps recruiting ad was directed by somebody who doesn't really have that much of a militarist background, but won an Academy Award for cinematography recently or something. But you can't fault them for trying to buy the best or whatever. But I was just curious if they've been going to the same well of directors over and over, or anything like that, and didn't see much of that. But just like you said, the graphic design they put on the cars, it's eye-catching. They spent a lot of time trying to think about how they can represent themselves, and a lot of money on it, which seems waste. Maybe it's amazing, and they still can't meet their recruiting goals. Most years. Yeah. They dump all that money on looking pretty. And I guess if you don't have anything else on sports, we can move to esports.
yeah. This is a big one.
Yeah, this was the one that was like very interesting to me. So the first one, and I knew this when it came out. I think it was conscientiously, and it matched the graphic design. They changed the colors up or whatever. But there was a video game called America's Army. I don't know if anyone. This is around the time I gave up on gaming because I was too slow and crummy at it, and I just wasn't. I got too busy or whatever. But like, there was a game called America's Army that was kind of a combined creation of the of a graduate of the Naval Postgraduate School named Mike Capps and another guy named Wardinski, they designed Unreal Tournament. What I think Gears of War, Shadow Complex, Infinity Blade, Bulletstorm, and Quantum Break, which all are games those are games I've never played, but I have heard of. Like, this is why by the time I was not interested in gaming that well to know those games. I've heard of all of them. You know what I mean? So these were like kind of big hitters that collaborated to develop this Army recruiting tool that I know got wildly popular for a little while. I know I downloaded it and dorked around on it as a major kind of early first-person shooter. And that guy now is involved in AI and kind of, I think, moving in the same direction. It's called Dive Plane, and I think he's working on some kind of AI in the same field. The other fellow, Wardinski, who collaborated to create it, is, just in case you live in Alabama's 5th Congressional District, running for election in Alabama. So I maybe recommend against supporting him. I don't know all of his policies, but the fact that he's part of this recruiting machine. And at the same time, or just a little bit later, the Marine Corps was slow to the game on this. I used to play a video game series when I was into video games called Close Combat, and it was kind of a squad-based, like, overhead view real-time strategy that I thought was really cool. And it was kind of unique, and it had some interesting realism aspects. And the Marine Corps got in bed with Destineer and 2K games. I don't know if you've heard of either of those yourself, but I loved the games that they produced in this series called Close Combat. And they completely destroyed and changed it into a deliberate recruiting tool they called Close Combat First to Fight, that a friend of mine got into. So kind of going back, thinking about how they do destroy art, like when they changed that series, the code, into something that was, at least going somewhere, into crap. And this, they kind of, I don't know, maybe it was more popular with other people, but they, and now they've kind of gone further into actually having, and these stories, but they've had esports teams. I know you covered this a while ago, but the military has a sports team for everything. They have a Army football team and a Marine Corps football team that play sort of an intramural league. And so then they would love nothing more than to be competitive on a higher level and to advertise that they're sports teams. But in esports, they actually manage, because the Marine Corps or the military manages to recruit. I don't know how competitive their esports teams are with like the top tier, because I don't follow esports. But the fact is that they create these esports teams, and they go out there, and recruiters actively recruit through different esports games. They're messaging kids that are underage, very young, whether you should maybe think about joining the military, like sliding into the DMs on kids, all like groomers, basically trying to groom kids through gaming. And I imagine it's working, and because gaming's pretty popular among the military already, and I literally know people who like want to make the Air Force esports team. So they think they're so good at, what's this, the soccer where they're driving cars, Rocket League or something like that they go to these conventions, and they're desperate to make it onto the team. And the purpose for that is recruiting. It's not just, and it's to show kids that, yeah, you can join the military and still be into gaming too. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's a little bit more nefarious too, because it's not just that they're going to the tournaments, but they actually maintain Twitch accounts, which is like the for people who don't know, the YouTube of gaming. It's like a social media slash, like, content distribution platform where you sit there and you game and you interact with like the people watching you, and so they'll sit there and play Call of Duty and then talk with whoever's watching. Well, I could tell you from working in a school, kids watch Twitch. You know what I mean? I don't know how many 20-year-olds. I'm sure there are some 20-year-olds watching Twitch. I'm sure there's a few older people, but a lot of these people are under 18 years old, and they're, watching the military. And, I remember like Call of Duty, I played a lot during high school, and it like, reinforced a lot of the militarism stuff for me, in that, you get like, you talk about the guns and, which one's better, the MP5K, or, you talk about the Predator drones and the AC-130, and then, you also don't just like play it on the game. You look it up on Wikipedia, and then about the weapon, and then there's some video of a general talking about how much that thing kicks ass, and how it like gets the terrorists for us and stuff like. And it's very easy to just get consumed in all of that. And I'm sure the military is finding Twitch a very effective recruiting tool.
Yeah, and so it's crazy because they literally have developed their own games. I imagine, I don't have I can't show you this, but I imagine they play a role in developing games that they don't develop themselves, that they get that editorial discipline by contributing to the storylines, and then they use, so it's like at every level they develop them, they tweak the storylines of things that are out there. There's a great podcast by the guy Eyes Left. It's like left-wing veterans. It's the guy Spencer Rapone, the West Point graduate who famously like had "Communism Will Prevail" on his shirt or whatever underneath his uniform at graduation. But he did a podcast. I think they're on Twitch now, which I'm not. So I miss everything they produce. But when they were putting out a podcast, they did a great episode about how essentially the Highway of Death slaughter that we did was sanitized and recast as something the Russians did in the latest version of some video. I think of what was the one you mentioned that's real popular? Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Like the latest version. They basically have a Highway of Death incident, but show the Russians doing it as the bad guys instead of the Americans doing it. But everything else is the highway of death. So they did a great episode where they covered that. And there's as far as I know, you don't have the smoking gun as to whether the military actually massaged that story. But it would be of a piece with everything else they're trying to do in the media, entertainment more generally. You know, change their image and ensure that they come out in the positive light. So you have it's. And you know what's funny is too, honestly, people learn history and stuff like that from movies and video games. Let's be real honest. Myself, and I'm a history nerd, some wars, what I know about them is from the movie I watched about them. You know what I mean? The Spanish, the Filipino revolt against the Spanish, I only know about because of 1898, the Ultimos de los Filipinos. You know what I mean? Otherwise, I know almost nothing about that war. As interested as I am, there's only so many hours in the day. And so when people are learning their history through a video game that says the highway of death was the Russians, I guarantee there's a lot of kids running around out there who think that. You know what I mean? And if they have a role in just recasting and changing that history, it's so nefarious on so many levels, and it's wildly popular. You know? So, yeah, and that the only. Any other thoughts on video games?
No, that was all I had on video games.
Yeah.
Just that, just think about how much, think about a kid, especially if it's like a young male, and how much time they spend playing video games. I mean, that's probably one of the primary influences in their life.
Yeah, it almost certainly is. And God knows how many people think, they want to talk about the military through what they learned in a video game. And I can understand why it replicates it, but and God knows that we have a lot of trouble getting kids away from video games in general and into other things. And I'm not even preaching the video games are all bad, but the fact that so many of them are militarist, how do you guide your kids away from that or towards something that isn't going to just be a recruiting tool, a propaganda tool,
right?
And a propaganda and recruiting tool,
right?
Combined is what it effectively is.
Yeah, it's just so much misreality of war, like the fact that civilians don't exist in any of these things, and people hit the respawn button, and that's just what I mean. It's so easy, and a lot of times you turn off friendly fire, so that's not an issue either. But maybe we should wrap up here. I know we got one more to talk about, and that is what you I don't know if this is a word that you coined. If it is, you should probably write an article and
I did
claim credit for it. Retail militarism, and this is these companies that use the military to be we're the military guys that sell coffee or whatever the hell else. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure that hopefully there's listeners who can chime in and add a dozen things, but this retail militarism, it's everywhere, and it's, I could almost put it into two categories, but they're both of the same piece of trying to cash in on the military's position in our society and all the advertising the military is already, propaganda the military's put out there, and just ride that straight into brand identification. So you have Black Rifle Coffee. Aside from, you could say that there's a connection between coffee becoming the drink of choice of America to World War II, where it was issued by Folgers, you know what I mean? Or back to the Civil War. But there's really no logical reason why your Ethiopian blend has to be branded by Black Rifle Coffee, except that they managed to just try to tap into this militarist this market for, it makes me badass by association if I buy Black Rifle Coffee and drink that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this is across the board. I mean, there's all kinds of niche brands of coffee now. Everyone's got their artisanal roastery, but it's just crazy that I swear there must be an economic boom in that I don't understand. There's got to be a subsidy somewhere, because there's everywhere I turn around in my hipsters. But anyways, but yeah, so from retail militarism with Black Rifle Coffee to along most of the East Coast and kind of branching outward, there's friggin' Mission Barbecue, which is just imperialism, the restaurant. I did steal that line, but it's just wall to wall. If you haven't set foot in one of these, I don't encourage you to go, but it might be worth poking inside and just seeing. Somehow when they open these places up, they have a curator or somebody that goes around and collects unit badges and coins and helmets from squadrons that are in the area. And the minute the place opens, it's just decked wall to wall. Instead of sports memorabilia, it's military memorabilia specific to that area where they've opened the business. And it's not just that, like, and then people add to it by taking their policeman's patch or whatever and adding it to the bulletin board or whatever. But the place is just, it's hard to imagine, but they have pictures of military equipment and pilots' helmets and a Navy football uniform in Annapolis and an Army football uniform up in New York. And, you know, it's just, and in what world does barbecue have anything to do with that, being decked wall to wall in unit badges and and having country music blaring? You know what I mean? The country music at least makes sense a little bit with barbecue. You know what I mean? But like, there's no reason this place has to. And if you get your food delivered, it comes on an old deuce and a half. You know, painted all black with big stars on it. You know, a U.S. Army star. But every Mission Barbecue has a giant deuce and a half truck parked out front as a billboard / delivery truck. You know, why?
You know. I think there's a little bit to it, and I almost said this with the NFL, but I think it's like probably better than I'm talking about it here, and that is just like after 9/11, this kind of the whole they hate us for our freedom thing, and so now like NFL and like cheerleaders and like all the things that we thought that the terrorists didn't like, then like there's like an additional reason to like pair that with the military and grift off of it. I think that has something to do with it, and I'm sure like barbecue is another one of those things. Like Muslims don't eat pork, and so like, you know, yeah, I remember like, you know, just when I used to watch like football games, there was like the first commercial would be like the Army drone commercial, the middle one would be like the Coors Light and Twins commercial where they're like eating bacon, drinking beer, and then the next one would be the Marine Corps commercial where at the end they go, the few, the proud, the Marines. I'm sure everybody remembers that if they're a little bit old enough to. And just like I think all that was supposed to be associated together in our head with like, this is like the part of America that we're protecting: country music, beer drinking, mini skirts, boobies, football, barbecue, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, it kind of, I don't even know, like Under Armour is definitely worse about this too, but the last one I have kind of, and it kind of ties back to the NFL too, is, you know, I don't think of them, I don't think of Nike, especially Nike, as a kind of more internet, like global brand at this point. I don't think that they necessarily feel like they have to, that it's probably tailored to the U.S. market or maybe some other markets. Under Armour is more of a national only brand. They haven't really broken out much. They're local to Maryland, so I know people who work for Under Armour, and my best friend works for Nike, and I hear his, you know, thoughts on things too. But yeah, they developed this. Like, is it to some extent they're just kind of following the market into the camouflage and all that stuff? But you know, it's got to be. It can't just be Nike Pro when they're competing line with Under Armour, like the moisture wicking material that Nike came out. It couldn't just be Nike Pro. It had to be Nike Pro Combat. You know what I mean? Just what and why is it? Nobody's gearing up for combat in a Nike moisture wicking shirt, except for Nike Pro Combat sold better and marketed better. They had to tack that on there, and Under Armour too, and then add in like all the camo flare and all that stuff, and then you could turn away from that. You can not buy that. You know what I mean? And that's just. I know it doesn't seem like much, but it's one of the few little pieces of leverage. If for those of us that are more on the libertarian free market side, just being conscientious of how we vote with our fiat, or you know, of like, do we really need to throw our money to the people that are just kind of feeding back on this cycle of just insane militarism that we swim in here?
Yeah, I think I got one of those Nike cooling shirts on right now. So much of it is hard to do because everybody contracts with the military.
Well, and you don't have a choice sometimes, too.
Right.
Which really, you know, if you want a shirt for the military, you have to find, where's the packaging? I just came across this. there were some T-shirts that were that I had left over and like fresh in the package from my military days. And if you really wanted the military issue, you would say U.S. prison industries, and it would be built by enslaved people, enslaved people in a minimum security prison somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you like, it was just everything the military buys is either made by prisoners or by the blind. Like all the pens they made by the blind, because there's some company where they get a deal for a charity deal or a deal for making Skillcraft making pens for the military, and they say produced by blind people as sort of which Lighthouse for the Blind is the company that makes money producing pens for the military. But I digress a little bit into like, yeah, I'm sure some people are buying it because it's like that's what the Army wears, and I'm sure little kids too are like, is this what the Army wears when it has camo on or whatever? And like, it's just our one little way. Some of our ways we have leverage is choosing games, movies, sports, not letting the ad buys show, not all those little things. We can change the channel. We can choose to watch something different. We can spend our money on a different piece of clothing that it seems small, but at least it's something we can do that maybe will dilute this, militarist culture a little bit and kind of take the dollar out of it.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, just all the silly things that like people have spent money on, I think because of partly the military, like after 9/11, Hummers were all over the place, and part of that was like the military use Hummer. Not that anybody was rolling around in Afghanistan in a big yellow H2, but the guy who bought one kind of thought like, oh, I have like the same thing the Army does.
God knows when I was a kid and I saw, when the Hummer first was sold publicly, and Arnold Schwarzenegger bought one, and I don't know why I remember that, but then I was at some car show and I saw a Hummer and I was like, wow, that's what I want. It's a terrible vehicle. It's awful. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Just like I said, the prison industry shirts are not what you really like. There's so many other veterans that'll will rant about this, but you don't want mil-spec. Mil-spec is garbage. Whether it's your uniform, whether it's the clothes you wear or the Humvee or a mil-spec AR-15, you don't want that. It's not that good. But somehow, usually the free market version of it is better, but you don't even need that, You just buy the stuff that's best for you.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Well, this has been great, and we will definitely do another one of these before I wrap up my Villains of the Afghan War series, because I'm sure we got some more specific names to name and everything like that. But I think this is probably one of the more important ones I'm going to do, especially for anybody in my generation, probably anybody 40 or younger. All of this was the culture for us. This was really what they used to make sure that people didn't question the wars a whole lot and just went along with it. And talking about this and trying to expose this is very important. And if something ever happens again, I'm guessing they'll likely try to roll out the same propaganda to sell the next war, and to be aware of it and to tell other people it's going on around you is really important. If you gotta watch a rom-com, don't watch the military deliver Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm looking forward to doing the other one. I know I when we first thought of this, I had a few people in mind that are kind of sort of think tanker apparat, people that help implement the policy. So there's some interesting ones, and I know Matthew Ho I'm looking forward to all your episodes, because I really do want to know the people to know the names and know the backgrounds. So this is a really cool project you're going on. I'm glad I managed to. I was sitting there being like, we need somebody to come up with a list of people to hold accountable, and I frankly just wasn't going to do it all by myself. So at least this break it down to a few chunks for me, and I'm really excited to hear your other guests list out some of the other villains that we need to keep our eyes on, and the heroes that deserve all of our respect and admiration, and support.
And you mentioned there Matthew Ho, who has done great work, and I talked about him last week on the show with Kevin Gastola and everything like that. He should be the Friday show for conflicts of interest, but what I really wanted to mention him for was you and him did a fantastic episode of your show, Why I'm Antiwar, that I really recommend everybody check out. And I think, lucky for us, it was just the first part, and so there's more to come on that. So tell people not only where they could follow you and where they could see your show, but also just a little bit about that episode with Matt.
Yeah, so Matt and I really hit it off. That was our first conversation, and we started rolling. So my show is called Why I'm Antiwar. You can find it at Antiwar Podcast on Twitter. Just look up Antiwar Podcast. It should be right there, hopefully under Antiwar Scott Horton's show, but I'd be happy to take second billing there. But yeah, the whole premise of my show is along these lines of kind of the opposite. What things out there in the culture, well, it could be anything in your life, but what things that have you encountered in your life that made you question war and think differently? It doesn't have to be the kill shot moment that turned you towards being anti-war. It could be just a pivot point that made you question things a little bit. Matt and I talked a lot. First episode we talked about, like I said, we talked for an hour and a half, and I try to make it bite-sized little chunks, so it's only like 7 minutes of him telling about all the military books they give you to read. He had read them before he joined the military and just didn't get the message, I think is what he said there. And like how, just talking about how you kind of have to, unfortunately, we have to get through the people seeing it for the first time in the media, seeing Platoon and not taking the militarist message, but instead taking the anti-war message out of it. Well, there isn't a militarist message in Oliver Stone's Platoon, but the first time I saw it, I just saw a war movie that I was excited about. You know what I mean? I didn't get it till later. So how do we bring people around to getting it earlier and understanding it is what we talked about a lot. And so there'll be a few more episodes, small chunks. I have Adam Kokesh in the can, as well as a woman who was an Army nurse who basically turned anti-war because of the broken body she dealt with, and it really affected her. So those are coming. I'm slow at my editing process, but I'm getting better, and have the time to rededicate. So look forward to episodes. There should almost certainly be one this weekend, and I'm aiming for every weekend, but it's hopefully, if it's past every other week, I'm slow. But thank you so much. I look forward to hearing Matthew with you.
All right. Thanks so much for coming on, Scott, and we'll do this again soon.
Thanks.